Commander Sarah Chen stood at the observation deck of the UES Defiant, watching the massive alien fleet approach through the void of space. The Zephyrian armada stretched across the starfield like a plague of metal locusts, their biomechanical ships pulsing with an eerie green light that made her stomach turn. Each vessel was the size of a small city, covered in what looked like living tissue that shifted and breathed in the vacuum of space. "Incoming transmission, Commander," Lieutenant Torres announced from the communications station, his voice tight with nervous energy. "Put it through," Sarah replied, straightening her uniform. She had commanded the Defiant for 3 years, but this was humanity's first official contact with an alien civilization. The weight of representing her entire species pressed down on her shoulders like a physical force. The main screen flickered to life, revealing a creature that defied easy description. The Zephyrian stood nearly 10 feet tall, its body a grotesque fusion of insect and machine. Multiple arms sprouted from its torso, each one ending in different appendages. Some were claws, others were mechanical tools, and a few appeared to be weapons. Its head was triangular, with compound eyes that reflected light like black mirrors. When it spoke, its voice came through the translators as a series of clicks and buzzes that somehow formed words. "I am War Prime Kithax of the Zephyrian Collective," the alien announced, its multiple arms gesturing in what might have been a threatening display. "We have observed your pathetic species for several of your solar cycles. You amuse us with your primitive technology and laughable biology." Sarah kept her expression neutral, though anger flared in her chest. "I'm Commander Chen of the United Earthship Defiant. We welcome this opportunity for peaceful contact between our civilizations." The alien's laugh was like the sound of breaking glass. "Peaceful? You misunderstand your situation, human. We are here to claim this system for the collective. Your species will serve as workers in our biofactories, assuming you prove useful enough to keep alive." "That's not going to happen," Sarah said firmly. "Humanity will defend itself." Kithax's multiple eyes focused on her with what seemed like genuine amusement. "Defend? With what? We have studied your anatomy, Commander Chen. Your species is laughably weak. You possess only 2 arms, making you inferior to even our lowest worker caste. How can creatures with such limited appendages hope to match our superior design?" The alien raised its 6 arms, each one moving independently to demonstrate different combat forms. "We can operate multiple weapons simultaneously, manipulate our ships with precision you cannot imagine, and conduct warfare on a scale that would overwhelm your simple minds. Your 2-armed form is an evolutionary dead end." Sarah's crew exchanged worried glances. The Zephyrians weren't wrong about the technical disparity. Earth's fleet consisted of only 12 ships, hastily retrofitted exploration vessels that had been converted for military use when long-range sensors first detected the approaching alien force. Each Zephyrian ship appeared to be armed with weapons that could crack planets. "We may have fewer ships," Sarah replied, "but we won't surrender without a fight. Humanity has survived worse odds." "Worse odds." Kithax's mechanical appendages clicked together in apparent delight. "You have never faced anything like the collective primitive human. We have conquered 47 star systems, enslaved dozens of species, and absorbed their technologies into our own. Each victory makes us stronger, more adaptable. Your 2-armed species cannot comprehend the tactical advantages of our multi-limbed superiority." The alien gestured with 4 arms toward the human fleet. "Look at your vessels, single-pilot fighters, cramped bridges where your crew must work around each other's limitations. Your pilots can barely manage their primitive controls with only 2 hands. Meanwhile, our warriors operate their bioships with 6 arms, managing weapons, shields, navigation, and communication simultaneously. Each of our pilots is worth 10 of yours." Dr. Elizabeth Hawkins, the Defiant science officer, leaned toward Sarah and whispered urgently, Commander, our preliminary scans suggest their ships are primarily biological constructs. They might be vulnerable to electromagnetic weapons, but we'd need to get close enough to use them effectively. Kythax's enhanced hearing apparently caught the whispered conversation. Your science officer speaks of electromagnetic weapons? How quaint. Our bioships are naturally shielded against such primitive attacks. The living tissue that forms our hulls can adapt and regenerate faster than your weapons can damage them. Even if you could penetrate our defenses, which you cannot, our multiple appendages allow us to repair and reconfigure our ships mid-battle. The War Prime continued its taunting display, using its various arms to demonstrate complex sequences that would be impossible for a human to replicate. Your species builds tools to compensate for your biological limitations. We are the tools. Each of my arms serves a different function in combat. I can simultaneously pilot my vessel, target multiple enemies, activate defensive systems, communicate with my fleet, analyze battlefield data, and prepare contingency weapons. What can your two arms accomplish against such capability? Sarah felt the eyes of her bridge crew upon her. They were scared, and she couldn't blame them. The technological gap was obvious, and the Zephyrians' physical advantages seemed insurmountable. But something about the aliens' arrogant display sparked an idea in the back of her mind. You're right about our limitations, she said slowly, causing worried looks from her crew. Humans only have two arms. We can't multitask the way you can. We're forced to focus on one thing at a time. Kythax's compound eyes glittered with satisfaction. Finally, you understand your inferiority. Perhaps surrender will be less painful than the alternative. I never said we were surrendering, Sarah replied with a slight smile. I just wanted to understand our differences before we begin. The alien's posture shifted slightly, perhaps sensing something in her tone. Begin what? Human? Showing you what focused attention can accomplish. Sarah turned to her tactical officer. Lieutenant Morrison, are our new kinetic systems online? Yes, Commander. All rail drivers are charged and ready. Kythax's multiple arms began moving in what appeared to be agitation. Kinetic weapons? Your primitive projectiles cannot penetrate our biohull defenses. We have studied your technology extensively. You studied our old technology, Sarah corrected. The weapons we've been using for the past 50 years. But necessity has a way of accelerating innovation. Dr. Hawkins stepped forward, her earlier nervousness replaced by scientific enthusiasm. War Prime Kythax, may I ask how your species typically develops new technologies? The alien seemed puzzled by the question. We absorb the knowledge of conquered species and integrate their capabilities into our collective consciousness. It is an efficient system that has served us for millennia. Fascinating, Hawkins continued. So you improve by addition, more arms, more weapons, more capabilities. But tell me, have you ever considered the advantages of subtraction, of removing variables to achieve perfect efficiency? Your question makes no sense, human. How can removing capability be advantageous? Sarah smiled grimly. Let me show you. The space between the fleets suddenly erupted with motion as the human ship spread into what appeared to be a desperate defensive formation. The Zephyrian vessels responded by advancing in their traditional multi-pronged attack pattern, their biohulls rippling with excitement as weapons systems came online. Your formation is chaotic, Kythax observed. You spread your forces too thin. Each of our ships can engage multiple targets simultaneously, while your single-focus vessels can barely track one enemy at a time. You're absolutely right, Sarah agreed. We can only focus on one thing at a time. The Defiant's main batteries began to rotate, their targeting systems locking onto the lead Zephyrian vessel. But instead of firing multiple types of weapons in the scattered pattern typical of space combat, all of the ship's energy was channeled into a single system. What are you doing? Kythax demanded, its multiple arms working frantically at its control systems. Your energy signature suggests you're charging some kind of massive kinetic weapon, but the power levels are beyond what your primitive technology should be capable of achieving. That's the beauty of having only 2 arms, Sarah explained as the Defiant's railgun systems reached full charge. We can't multitask like you can. We're forced to put everything we have into one perfect shot. The first railgun fired. The projectile wasn't large, a dense tungsten rod no bigger than a telephone pole, but it had been accelerated to nearly 15% of light speed by the Defiant's experimental magnetic drive system. The round crossed the distance between fleets in less than a second, striking the lead Zephyrian bioship with the force of a small nuclear weapon. The alien vessel's living hull, designed to adapt and regenerate against conventional weapons, simply ceased to exist where the projectile hit. The kinetic energy was too massive, too concentrated, arriving too quickly for any biological system to respond. The bioship folded inward on itself like a soap bubble popping in reverse, its entire structure failing catastrophically. Kithax's triumphant posture crumbled as it watched its flagship die. Impossible! No single weapon should possess such destructive capability. That's where you're wrong, Sarah replied, watching as the other human ships began charging their own railgun systems. A single weapon focused on a single purpose can achieve things that no amount of multitasking can match. While you were busy managing 6 different weapon systems, we put everything we had into perfecting one. The second shot came from the UES Valiant, striking another Zephyrian vessel with the same devastating results. The alien fleet, which had seemed so confident moments before, suddenly found itself facing weapons that could destroy their largest ships with single hits. This is not possible! Kithax's multiple arms flailed in confusion and rage. Your species is inferior! You have only 2 appendages. How can you achieve such focused destruction? Dr. Hawkins stepped forward again, her voice calm and educational. War Prime. You've spent so long thinking about what you can do that you never considered what you should do. Your multiple arms allow you to attempt many tasks simultaneously, but that also means you never achieve true mastery in any single area. Humans learn to focus our limitations into strengths. A 3rd railgun fired, and a 3rd Zephyrian ship died. The alien fleet was beginning to scatter, their perfect formations breaking apart as commanders who had never experienced such devastating single-shot weapons tried to adapt their multitasking combat strategies. Retreat! Kithax screamed across the communication channel. All vessels, implement evasive pattern 7, full regeneration mode. But the human ships were already repositioning for their next shots. Unlike the Zephyrian vessels, which needed to coordinate multiple weapon systems and defensive measures simultaneously, the human ships could dedicate their full attention to tracking targets and delivering precise kinetic strikes. Commander, Lieutenant Morrison reported, the alien fleet is attempting to withdraw to maximum engagement range. Sarah nodded. Let them go. We've made our point. As the Zephyrian ships fled beyond effective range of the railgun systems, Kithax's image reappeared on the main screen. The alien's earlier arrogance had been replaced by something approaching fear. This is not how combat should proceed, it said, its multiple arms trembling. You should not be able to achieve such focused destructive power with such primitive biology. Maybe that's the problem with your thinking, Sarah replied. You assume that more is always better. Sometimes, the greatest strength comes from knowing exactly what you want to accomplish and putting everything you have into achieving it. The transmission cut off abruptly as the Zephyrian fleet continued its retreat. But Sarah knew this was only the beginning. The aliens would return, probably with new tactics designed to counter humanity's focused approach to warfare. The real test would come when they faced an enemy that had learned from its mistakes. 3 weeks after the first battle, the Zephyrian collective returned to the Sol system with a fleet 3 times larger than before. Commander Sarah Chen watched from the bridge of the newly reinforced UES Defiant as nearly 200 alien bioships emerged from hyperspace at the edge of the system. The sight made her stomach clench with dread, but she forced herself to maintain the calm demeanor her crew needed to see. "Ma'am, they're maintaining distance this time," reported Lieutenant Morrison from the tactical station, "holding position at approximately 8 million kilometers. "Smart of them," Sarah muttered. The railgun systems that had proven so devastating in the first encounter had an effective range of roughly 3 million kilometers. The aliens had clearly learned from their previous losses and were staying well beyond that range. Dr. Hawkins looked up from her science station, her expression troubled. "Commander, I'm detecting some concerning modifications to their bioships. The hull configurations have changed significantly since our last encounter." Before Sarah could respond, the familiar image of War Prime Kithax appeared on the main screen. The alien looked different now. Additional mechanical components had been grafted onto its already complex form, and new appendages sprouted from various points on its torso. Its compound eyes held a cold intelligence that hadn't been there before. "Greetings, Commander Chen," Kithax said, its voice carrying a tone of deadly confidence. "I trust you have used these past weeks to prepare for your extinction." "War Prime," Sarah replied evenly. "I see you've made some changes since our last meeting." Kithax raised its newly augmented arms, displaying an array of sophisticated tools and weapons that definitely hadn't been there before. "Indeed, the collective has spent considerable resources analyzing your primitive railgun technology. We have adapted." Sarah felt her crew's tension spike. She'd expected this. Any intelligent enemy would learn from their defeats and develop countermeasures. The question was whether humanity's single advantage would prove enough against an enemy that could literally evolve their technology in real time. "Your focused weapon systems caught us off guard initially," Kithax continued, "but adaptation is the core strength of the collective. We have modified our bioships with redundant hull segments that can detach when struck by high-velocity projectiles. What destroys one section merely causes the rest of the vessel to regenerate stronger." The alien gestured with 4 of its arms toward its fleet. "Additionally, we have developed distributed targeting systems. Rather than focus on single objectives as your limited biology forces you to do, we can now engage every one of your vessels simultaneously while maintaining maximum defensive protocols." Dr. Hawkins quietly activated her personal communicator and whispered urgently to Sarah. "Commander, the bioship configurations suggest they've developed some kind of ablative armor system. Our railguns might still penetrate, but they'll need multiple hits to achieve kills." Sarah nodded almost imperceptibly, but her mind was racing. Multiple hits meant sustained engagement, which played directly into the Zephyrians' multitasking advantages. If humanity couldn't achieve quick, decisive victories with single shots, they'd be forced into exactly the kind of prolonged battle where the aliens' superior numbers and multi-limbed coordination would dominate. "We have also enhanced our own offensive capabilities," Kithax announced with obvious pleasure. "Each of our vessels now carries bioplasma weapons that can track and engage multiple targets simultaneously. Your ship's primitive defensive systems cannot possibly counter attacks from 6 different weapon systems per vessel." To demonstrate, one of the Zephyrian ships fired a test volley at a nearby asteroid. 6 different streams of energy, each a different color and apparently operating on different principles, struck the space rock from multiple angles. The asteroid didn't just explode, it seemed to dissolve, its matter breaking down at the molecular level. "Impressive," Sarah admitted, though her tone remained steady. "You've certainly been busy." "Indeed. And now we shall demonstrate the futility of your single-focus approach against true tactical superiority." The Zephyrian fleet began to advance, but this time, their formation was radically different. Instead of the tight groupings they'd used before, The bioships spread out into a complex three-dimensional pattern that maximized their ability to engage targets from multiple angles while minimizing the chances of multiple vessels being caught in a single railgun shot. "They're moving into engagement range," Morrison reported. "Estimate contact in 40 minutes at their current approach speed." Sarah turned to address her communications officer. "Lieutenant Torres, patch me through to the rest of the fleet." "Aye, Commander. You're broadcasting to all vessels." Sarah took a deep breath before activating the fleet-wide channel. Humanity's expanded fleet now consisted of 37 ships, not nearly enough to match the Zephyrian numbers, but every vessel that Earth could spare. Most were still converted civilian ships, hastily fitted with railgun systems and basic military equipment. "All ships, this is Commander Chen. As you can see, our enemy has adapted to our previous tactics. They're expecting us to rely on single-shot weapons and focused attacks. Today, we're going to show them that humans are capable of adaptation too." She paused, looking around at her bridge crew. Each face showed fear, but also determination. These were people who had signed up to defend their homeworld, knowing the odds were against them. "Dr. Hawkins, please explain project coordination to the fleet." Hawkins stepped forward, her scientific enthusiasm evident despite the gravity of their situation. "All vessels, during the past 3 weeks, we've been working on a new approach to combat coordination. The Zephyrians believe that their multiple limbs give them an insurmountable advantage in multitasking, but they've overlooked something crucial about human nature." She activated a holographic display that showed the human fleet's positioning. "Humans excel at something no other known species has demonstrated: perfect coordination between separate entities. While a Zephyrian can coordinate 6 arms on one body, humanity can coordinate hundreds of separate ships as if they were parts of a single organism." The display showed a complex pattern of movement vectors and firing solutions. "Each human ship will function as a specialized limb in a larger body. We're going to give the Zephyrians a taste of their own medicine. But instead of 6 arms, we're going to show them what 37 arms can accomplish when they work in perfect harmony." Kithax's voice crackled over the communication channel, apparently having monitored their broadcast. "Coordination between separate vessels? Impossible. No species has ever achieved the level of integration necessary for true multi-unit combat effectiveness. Your primitive communication systems introduce too much delay for real-time coordination." Sarah smiled grimly. "War Prime, you've studied our technology, but you haven't studied our psychology. Humans have been working together in perfect coordination for thousands of years. We call it music. We call it dancing. We call it teamwork. And now we're going to call it war." The human fleet suddenly exploded into motion, but not in the chaotic defensive pattern the Zephyrians expected. Instead, the 37 ships moved with the precision of a symphony orchestra, each vessel taking its position in a complex formation that seemed to flow like liquid through space. "Impossible," Kithax breathed. "Its multiple arms working frantically at its control systems. No species can achieve such precise coordination across multiple independent units." The first phase of the human attack began as 12 ships moved into what appeared to be a standard assault formation. The Zephyrian bioships responded exactly as expected, spreading out to engage multiple targets while activating their new ablative defense systems. But as the bioplasma weapons fired, the human ships weren't where they appeared to be. In perfect synchronization, each vessel had adjusted its position by just a few hundred meters, tiny movements that would have been impossible to coordinate without split-second timing. The alien weapons passed harmlessly through empty space. "What is this?" Kithax demanded. "How are you achieving such precise, evasive coordination?" "Practice," Sarah replied simply. "Humans have been learning to move together since before we discovered fire. We just applied those lessons to space combat." The second phase began as 25 ships simultaneously fired their railguns, not at the Zephyrian vessels, but at specific points in empty space. The tungsten rods, traveling at near-light speed, created a complex pattern of intersecting trajectories that seemed to serve no purpose, until the Zephyrian ships, following their programmed evasive maneuvers, flew directly into the projectiles' paths. 7 bioships died instantly, their ablative armor useless against the coordinated attack. The remaining alien vessels found themselves trapped within a shrinking cage of railgun fire, each escape route blocked by perfectly timed shots from the human fleet. "This level of coordination should be impossible," Kithax screamed, its confidence cracking. "You cannot predict our movements with such precision," Dr. Hawkins answered over the open channel, her voice filled with scientific fascination. "War Prime, you're thinking about this wrong. We're not predicting your movements. We're creating the conditions that force you to move exactly where we want you to go." The human fleet shifted into its third configuration, with groups of ships moving in interlocking patterns that created overlapping fields of fire. Every time the Zephyrian vessels tried to break free of the trap, they found themselves facing walls of coordinated railgun fire that made escape impossible. "Your multi-limbed advantage works when you're facing chaotic opposition," Sarah explained, as another wave of alien ships fell to the perfectly timed human attack. "But when every opposing force moves in perfect harmony, your ability to multitask becomes a liability. You're trying to track and engage 37 independent targets that are actually functioning as parts of a single entity." Kithax's image flickered on the screen, the alien's multiple arms moving in what appeared to be panic. "This cannot be. The collective has conquered 47 systems. No species has ever demonstrated such impossible coordination." "Maybe you've been conquering the wrong species," Sarah replied. The battle continued for another hour, but the outcome was no longer in doubt. Despite their superior numbers and advanced technology, the Zephyrian ships found themselves consistently outmaneuvered by the perfectly coordinated human fleet. Every tactical move they attempted was anticipated and countered by a force that seemed to think with a single mind while acting with 37 bodies. When the surviving bioships finally retreated beyond engagement range, they left behind the wreckage of over 60 vessels. The human fleet had lost only 3 ships, and those losses came only when individual vessels broke formation and tried to engage the enemy alone. "This is not over, Commander Chen," Kithax transmitted as his fleet prepared to withdraw. "The collective will study this new development and adapt accordingly. We will return with countermeasures that will render your coordination advantage meaningless." Sarah nodded grimly. "We'll be ready when you do, War Prime." As the alien fleet disappeared into hyperspace, she turned to address her exhausted crew. The victory had been decisive, but she knew it was temporary. The Zephyrians would return, probably with new tactics designed to counter humanity's coordination advantage. "Dr. Hawkins," she said quietly, "how long do you estimate we have before they come back?" The science officer considered the question carefully. "Based on their previous adaptation period, I'd say 6 to 8 weeks. But, Commander, there's something else we need to consider." "What's that?" "They're learning our tactics faster than we're developing new ones. Each time they adapt, they do it more efficiently. Eventually, they're going to evolve countermeasures faster than we can develop new strategies." Sarah stared out at the debris field that marked their victory, knowing that Dr. Hawkins was right. The war was becoming a race between human ingenuity and Zephyrian adaptation, and she wasn't sure which side would win that race. The third Zephyrian assault came exactly 7 weeks later, and this time they brought over 500 ships. Commander Sarah Chen stood on the bridge of the UES Defiant, now serving as the flagship of humanity's combined defense force, watching the largest alien armada ever assembled emerge from hyperspace throughout the outer system. The bioships no longer advanced in neat formations. Instead, They moved in seemingly random patterns that made coordination impossible to predict or counter. "Commander," Lieutenant Morrison reported from Tactical, his voice tight with barely controlled fear. "They're not approaching as a unified fleet. Individual vessels are taking completely independent attack vectors. I count at least 200 different approach angles." Dr. Hawkins looked up from her science station, her face pale. "They've eliminated the coordination advantage. Each ship is operating under completely autonomous control with no predictable pattern. Our previous tactics won't work against this." Sarah nodded grimly. She'd expected this development, but seeing it in action was still sobering. The Zephyrians had learned their lesson about coordinated opposition. By eliminating coordination entirely, they'd made it impossible for the human fleet to anticipate and counter their movements. War Prime Kithax's image appeared on the main screen, but the alien looked radically different now. Its body had been extensively modified, sporting at least 12 arms and multiple additional sensory organs. New mechanical components covered most of its torso, and its compound eyes had been replaced with sophisticated targeting systems. "Commander Chen," Kithax said, its voice carrying a tone of absolute certainty. "As you can see, the collective has once again adapted to counter your primitive tactics. This time, however, we have evolved beyond your ability to respond." Sarah studied the alien's new configuration. "Impressive modifications, War Prime. You've certainly been busy." "Indeed. Each of my vessels now operates under completely independent tactical protocols. Your coordination advantage is meaningless when there is no pattern to coordinate against. Furthermore, we have developed new bioweapons specifically designed to counter your railgun systems." The alien gestured with 6 of its arms toward the approaching fleet. "Each ship now carries defensive drones that can intercept kinetic projectiles before they reach their targets. Additionally, our hulls have been modified with reactive armor that actually becomes stronger when struck by high-velocity impacts." Dr. Hawkins whispered urgently to Sarah. "Commander, preliminary scans suggest they're right. The drone screens could potentially stop our railgun rounds, and the reactive armor appears to be designed specifically to counter kinetic weapons." Sarah felt the weight of her crew's eyes upon her. Humanity's expanded fleet now numbered 89 ships, every vessel that Earth and its colonies could muster. But even with their numerical increase, they were still outnumbered almost 6-1, and their primary weapons appeared to have been neutralized. "There's something else," Kithax continued, its multiple targeting systems focusing on the human fleet with predatory intensity. "We have studied the psychology behind your coordination abilities. Your species achieves perfect teamwork through emotional bonds and shared purpose. Therefore, we have developed weapons specifically designed to disrupt those bonds." One of the Zephyrian ships fired a strange, pulsating energy beam that struck the UES Courage, a destroyer positioned near the edge of the human formation. The beam didn't appear to damage the ship's hull, but Sarah immediately heard panicked voices over the communication channel. "This is Captain Martinez of the Courage," came a strained transmission. "We're experiencing severe psychological effects among the crew. Half my people are reporting intense paranoia and inability to trust their shipmates. We're losing coordination fast." Sarah's blood ran cold. If the Zephyrians could break down the trust and cooperation that made human coordination possible, humanity's only remaining advantage would disappear. "Clever, isn't it?" Kithax said with obvious satisfaction. "Your species' greatest strength becomes your greatest weakness when the emotional bonds that enable it are severed. Soon your fleet will be nothing but individual ships operating in chaos, exactly what we have evolved to counter." The alien fleet began to accelerate toward the inner system, their bioships firing the psychological disruption weapons at targets throughout the human formation. Ship after ship reported crew problems as the alien weapons took effect. Sarah turned to Dr. Hawkins. "How long before the psychological effects spread through the entire fleet?" At their current rate of fire, maybe 20 minutes, Hawkins replied. Commander, we need a new strategy, and we need it now. Sarah closed her eyes for a moment, her mind racing through possibilities. The Zephyrians had countered humanity's coordination advantage, neutralized their kinetic weapons, and were now attacking the psychological bonds that made human teamwork possible. By every logical measure, the battle was already lost. But as she opened her eyes and looked around at her bridge crew, she saw something that gave her hope. Despite the fear in their faces, despite the overwhelming odds, not one person was suggesting surrender. They were scared, but they were still here, still ready to fight for their home. Dr. Hawkins, she said quietly, remind me about the fundamental difference between human coordination and Zephyrian multitasking. Hawkins looked puzzled. Well, Zephyrian multitasking is about individual efficiency, one entity controlling multiple functions simultaneously. Human coordination is about multiple entities working together toward a common goal. Exactly. And what happens when you push human coordination to its absolute limit? Understanding began to dawn in Hawkins's eyes. The individual entities become less important than the collective goal. People are willing to sacrifice themselves for the greater good. Sarah activated the fleet-wide communication channel. All ships, this is Commander Chen. By now, you've all seen what we're facing. The enemy has countered every advantage we've developed. Their weapons can neutralize our railguns. Their tactics have eliminated our coordination advantage, and they're actively trying to break down the trust that holds us together as a fighting force. She paused, looking around at her crew. But they've made one fundamental miscalculation. They think that by removing our advantages, they've made us helpless. They don't understand that humans have one final capability they've never encountered before. Lieutenant Torres looked up from his station. Commander, what capability? Sarah smiled grimly. The ability to win by losing. She turned back to the fleet channel. All ships, prepare to implement Operation Final Focus. I'm transmitting new targeting coordinates to every vessel. The coordinates she sent caused murmurs of confusion throughout the fleet. Instead of targeting the Zephyrian ships, she was directing every railgun in the human fleet toward a single point in empty space, a location that seemed to serve no tactical purpose. Kithax's image flickered back onto the screen, the alien's multiple sensors apparently having detected the human's new targeting solution. What are you doing, Commander Chen? You cannot hope to damage our fleet by firing into empty space. You're right, Sarah replied. We can't damage your fleet by firing into empty space. But we're not trying to damage your fleet. Then what is the purpose of this futile gesture? Sarah looked directly into Kithax's compound eyes. We're going to show you what happens when 89 railguns, each carrying the focused intention of an entire human crew, fire simultaneously at exactly the same point in space-time. The alien's mechanical components began working frantically. That is impossible. The energy concentration would create a gravitational anomaly. No species would deliberately destabilize local space-time during a battle. No other species would, Sarah agreed, but humans have a saying, if you can't win the game, change the rules. She turned to Morrison. All ships report ready, Commander. Fire. 89 railgun systems fired simultaneously. Their tungsten rounds accelerated to 15% of light speed and aimed at precisely the same coordinates. The combined kinetic energy of the projectiles, concentrated at a single point, created exactly what Kithax had predicted, a gravitational anomaly. But it wasn't a random disturbance. Dr. Hawkins and her team had calculated the exact energy requirement needed to create a temporary but devastating effect, a localized space-time distortion that would propagate outward at the speed of light, effectively creating a gravity wave that would disrupt the delicate biomechanical systems of every Zephyrian ship within a 50 million kilometer radius. Impossible, Kithax screamed as the gravity wave reached its fleet. The bioships, with their living components and complex mechanical additions, began to tear themselves apart as the space-time distortion played havoc with their organic and artificial systems. But the human ships were affected too. The Defiant shuddered as gravitational stresses threatened to rip the hull apart. Throughout the fleet, vessels began taking massive structural damage from the very weapon they had created. "Commander!" Morrison shouted over the sound of groaning metal. "We're losing ships! The Cincinnati just broke apart, and the Denver is venting atmosphere!" Sarah gripped her command chair as the bridge lights flickered. "All ships, maintain formation. Hold together as long as possible." Kithax's image appeared one final time, but the War Prime's multiple mechanical enhancements were sparking and failing as the gravity wave tore through its ship's systems. "You are destroying yourselves along with us. This is madness." "No," Sarah replied, watching as more human ships succumbed to the gravitational stresses. "This is sacrifice, something your species has never understood." The gravity wave continued to propagate, and ship after ship from both fleets began to fail. But the effect was devastating the biomechanical Zephyrian vessels far more severely than the purely mechanical human ships. The aliens' greatest advantage, their adaptive biological components, had become a fatal weakness when subjected to gravitational forces that organic matter couldn't survive. Within minutes, the entire Zephyrian armada was drifting wreckage. The 500 bioships that had seemed so unstoppable were now nothing but debris floating in space. But the cost had been enormous. Only 12 human ships remained intact, and most of those were heavily damaged. As the gravitational distortion finally dissipated, Sarah surveyed the aftermath of the battle. The immediate Zephyrian threat had been eliminated, but at a cost that would take generations to recover from. Nearly the entire human space fleet had been sacrificed to achieve victory. Dr. Hawkins, nursing a broken arm from when a console exploded during the gravity wave, looked up at Sarah with a mixture of awe and horror. "Commander, we won. But the cost was exactly what it needed to be," Sarah finished. "The Zephyrians thought they understood human nature because they studied our coordination and teamwork. But they never understood the most fundamental aspect of humanity." "Which is?" Sarah looked out at the debris field that contained the remnants of both fleets. "That when everything we care about is threatened, humans are willing to sacrifice everything, including ourselves, to protect it. They could adapt to our technology, counter our tactics, and even disrupt our coordination, but they could never adapt to our willingness to pay any price for victory." A weak transmission came through from one of the surviving Zephyrian vessels. Apparently, Kithax had managed to survive in an escape pod. This is not how warfare should be conducted. No rational species destroys itself to defeat an enemy." Sarah activated the communication system one final time. "War Prime, that's the difference between the collective and humanity. You fight to add to what you already have. We fight to protect what we can't bear to lose. And there's no force in the universe stronger than people who have nothing left to lose except what they're fighting to save." The transmission cut off as Kithax's escape pod limped away toward hyperspace. Sarah knew that the surviving Zephyrians would carry word of humanity's final gambit back to the collective. The aliens would think twice before threatening another species that was willing to sacrifice everything rather than submit to conquest. As rescue ships from Earth arrived to collect survivors from the battle, Sarah reflected on the cost of their victory. Humanity had saved itself, but the price had been enormous. It would be generations before Earth could field another space fleet of significant size. But perhaps that was the most human thing of all, ensuring that future generations would have the chance to rebuild, to grow, to reach for the stars again. The Zephyrians had mocked humanity's two-armed limitations. never understanding that those same limitations had taught humans to focus everything they had on what mattered most. In the end, that focus had proved more powerful than any weapon.